Zach Kreger's Weapons opens on an open wound. 17 children, all from the same class, all leave their beds at exactly 2:17 a.m. at that uncanny time of night called the witching hour, running from the safety of their homes into the waiting darkness, never to return. Only one child from the class, Alex Lilly, remains, and the why of that child and his disappeared classmates is the central mystery to Kreger's breakout horror film. But Weapons isn't truly about those magically abducted kids or the parasitic crone who weaved the spell that kidnapped them. And it's not even about death, though there's plenty of death to be had. No, Weapons is about transmission, the way fear spreads, the way grief and addiction and suspicion spread, and the film tells you that immediately if you know where to look. So today I want to discuss 3 points to that end. I want to explore Glattis and the themes at work on her character because she's less like a witch and more like a parasite, and the movie does a lot of lifting to make us notice this. I want to discuss how the film is built on oppositions, like open and closed, nature and civilization, subject and object, town and forest, and how these binaries crank the movie's symbolic engine. And I want to decode the load-bearing numbers, colors, and symbols holding up the thematic center of the film. In other words, I'm going to make a big goddamn loaf of bread from the buckets of breadcrumbs Zach Kreger has scattered all throughout the film. So let's get to it. On the surface, Weapons is a mystery. A classroom of children vanish at 2:17 a.m. Their teacher, Justine, becomes the target of public suspicion, and a small Pennsylvania town rips itself to shreds trying to explain something it just cannot. That's the plot. But underneath that, Weapons is doing something uglier. It's staging grief as contagion. Zach Kreger wrote this film right after losing one of his closest friends, sketch comedian and local sexpot Trevor Moore. A sudden and devastating loss to the community and to Kreger personally. And you can feel that grief, that bewilderment in Weapons. This is not a film interested in clean cause and effect, in happy resolution. It's interested in what happens after the wound is incurred, what happens when something unbearable and unresolvable enters a community and starts rewriting everything it touches. That's why the school shooting imagery hits so hard. The empty desks, the grieving parents, the forever changed town looking for something, someone to punish because punishment feels better than helplessness. Kreger wants you to inhabit that grief before the supernatural even rears its head. He wants the film to hurt first and explain second. Because by the time Glattis arrives, like really arrives, you've already felt her logic. Something enters a closed system. It rewrites that system. Then it reaches for the next host. That's grief. That's addiction. That's violence. And that's witchcraft in this movie. Every major character is carrying some version of this transmission. Justine drowns herself in vodka. Paul white-knuckles his sobriety, relapses, and then cheats on his girlfriend with Justine. James is so hollowed out chemically and so comically deep into his addiction that he walks through a goddamn witch's basement like he's strolling through a Dave & Buster's. Marcus is possessed by his work, and Archer is obsessed with imposing rationality and control over an irrational, wildly out of control situation. And this is very clearly degrading what's left of his home life. And Glattis? Glattis is the purest form of this pattern. She literally cannot survive without getting her fix off living things, her injections of human vitality. All of these people are chasing dragons. And that's what makes Weapons so unnerving, but also so real. It's not showing you evil as a singular monster. It's showing you evil as a mechanism. The easiest way to misread Glattis is to treat her like a traditional witch. Because she isn't, or at least she isn't just that. It's the way she behaves, the way she enters people, rewrites them, and turns them into carriers. She doesn't simply kill. She doesn't merely haunt. She infests, injects, and weaponizes. And that distinction means everything. When Glattis takes control of the children, they aren't simply reduced versions of themselves. They aren't theatrical possession cases. They are the absence of themselves. happens. The switch gets flipped. The self gets cut off. Subject becomes object. She's like a magical circuit breaker. And that's what makes her less like a witch and more like a parasite. Less like a folkloric sorceress and more like an invasive biological force. She enters a host, alters its function, and then uses that host to propagate herself. And once you see that, the whole movie starts to click into place. The twigs, the blood, the binding rituals, the house turned into a nest, the children as drones, and the town as an infected system. Weapons is a witch movie built on the logic of infestation. So the real question is not what Glattis is. The real question is how she spreads. That's the film's obsession. That's Zach Cregger's obsession. Not the monster, the mechanism. One of the things that makes Weapons feel so dense is that it's structured around layers of opposing forces, like symbolic lasagna. Everywhere you look, the film is staging a conflict between two systems and asking us what happens when one consumes the other. And that question, what happens when one system meets its opposite, is not just a structural device, it's the thesis of the film. The movie opens with a mob turning on Justine, a full-blown witch trial driven by fear and anger, a whole community devouring a single woman because certainty feels better than ambiguity. And it ends with another mob, the weaponized children tearing Glattis apart. That bookending isn't subtle. Cregger is making a nasty point. The energy is the same. The crowd can persecute the innocent or destroy the guilty, but it's still crowd justice, mob justice, still the many consuming the one. The direction of the violence changes, but the mechanism doesn't. That's the first transmission the film is tracking. Not Glattis's magic, but the social contagion of fear. Then there's Justine and Glattis. Justine is openness. Glattis is enclosure. And Cregger embeds that opposition directly into their names. The name Justine comes from the Latin justus, just, fair, righteous, upright. A name built on the idea of availability, because justice doesn't pick sides or close its doors. It makes itself accessible to everyone equally, and that's exactly who Justine is. She treats the kids she teaches with fairness and selflessness, even when it destroys her professionally. Cregger underlines this so hard, he costumes her in a sweater with a giant red heart on the chest, which works on two levels simultaneously. It marks her as a genuinely kind and moral person, and it marks her as a social aberration, a scarlet letter, someone who has transgressed the community's norms just by being too open, too visible, and too much. The film treats her openness as both her greatest quality and the thing that almost destroys her. Glattis's name is trickier, and the ambiguity is almost certainly deliberate. The name is Welsh, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it here. And it's rooted in country, land, and nation, territory, the owned and defended thing, which is a perfect name for a creature who partitions every space she enters, who makes borders with supernatural wards of salt, who demarks every threshold as a line that punishes you for crossing. Justine means justice, open, impartial, available to all, and Glattis means territory, closed, defended, owned. One crosses boundaries because that's her nature. The other is a boundary made flesh. And when an open system meets a closed one, only one gets to keep its shape. Archer and Glattis, civilization versus malignant nature. There's an even more precise binary running between Archer and Glattis. Archer is civilization. Glattis is malignant nature. Archer builds homes for a living. Over the course of the movie, he draws lines to map and measure, to rescue and restore. He imposes social order because order is how human beings carve out survival in a natural world that is, at best, indifferent to us and at worst, actively trying to eat us. His obsessive need to find his son makes him the film's most relatable figure. A man trying to outthink a contagion that doesn't care about reason, trying to apply the tools of civilization to something that predates civilization entirely. Glattis draws lines too, but for the opposite reason. Her borders don't protect, they isolate, they bind, and they digest. Same action, opposite purpose. And that's the whole film in miniature. And his name is doing some work too. because archers are soldiers. They're disciplined, precise, capable of hitting a target the rest of us can't even see clearly, which is exactly what Archer does. Methodically, obsessively, mapping the path the children took, connecting the dots nobody else is connecting. He is civilization's instrument, a man who measures the world in order to survive it. Beneath all of these is the deepest binary in the film: civilization versus infestation. Not civilization versus evil in some abstract sense. Civilization versus something older, more insectile, more transmissible, more indifferent than human morality has any framework for. And this is what I love about this particular binary. Like identical twins with opposing natures, an infestation is a civilization in its own right. A microcosm of the same structure that binds all living things together into a whole rather than a loose collection of individuals. Ants, bees, fungi, living networks threading through soil, connecting everything. These are not chaotic systems. They are ruthlessly organized ones. They have hierarchies, communication, and purpose. They convert individual organisms into components of something larger than themselves. And that's what Glattis is building in that basement. A colony. And that's what makes her so hard to defeat, because you can't fight a colony by killing a single organism. The colony is the point. The colony is the mechanism and the method of transmission. Kill the queen, something else pops up to take its place. Cut out the infection, and the spores are already drifting on the wind somewhere else, infecting something else, beginning again. And this is why the ending doesn't feel like a victory. Killing Glattis doesn't end the system, it just creates a vacancy. And as we'll discuss in Act 3, someone has already inherited the role that Glattis left vacant with her demise. Western horror has used the tension of this binary forever. The town is law, order, family, and safety. The space that human beings carved out of a world that didn't offer it for us. The forest is what existed before all of that. It's hunger, darkness, cold, and death. The place where we are not conquerors but merely visitors who are not welcome simply as we are. Weapons understands that mythology, but instead of keeping the witch in the woods, it lets the woods come to the suburbs. That's why the environment feels so wrong from the first frame. The trees loom too heavily. The foliage presses too close. The sounds of insects are unreasonably loud. And that's not a sound design accident. Kreger wants you to associate Glattis and the Lily House with insects, because Glattis, like an insect, has infested that home. The film is using sound to tell you what your eyes are already showing you. And Glattis's satanic little black bonsai tree is a key image here. It represents the entire dark forest compressed into a single decorative object. Nature miniaturized, but no less malignant. A thing in which something venomous could be hiding. A reminder that malignant nature hasn't been defeated, not really, but it rather moved in the front door in the middle of the night. Civilization doesn't get attacked from outside, it gets overgrown from within. This is where the film and this video gets weirdly specific. Zach Kreger doesn't frame Glattis as a witch. He frames her as a poisonous organism. There's a concept in biology called aposematism. Aposematism. How the f do you pronounce aposematism?
Aposematism.
Aposematism, okay. There's a concept in biology called aposematism. The use of bright, conspicuous signals to warn predators that a creature is dangerous. Things like poison dart frogs, coral snakes, brightly colored and beautiful, but deadly. Glattis is aposematic. Look at how she's outlandishly, flamboyantly costumed against the film's cold, muted color palette. She warns us of her deadly toxicity using one of the oldest visual languages in nature. And Amy Madigan pushes this even further with her Oscar-winning performance. The stillness, the sudden, precise lunges to stab, pluck, or cut. The bright, brittle warmth and the low, uncanny threat. She doesn't move like a frail old woman. She moves like something ancient and cunning that's conserving energy between strikes. And then there's the branch of her little black bonsai tree, her symbolic wand. If we follow the visual logic that Kreger is pathing out for us, its thorns are essentially stingers that Glattis uses to puncture her flesh to activate a supernatural chemical reaction. She mixes her own blood and a personal object of the victims, an act we can and will read as envenoming. She transfers control. She transmits her will into the host. The logic of this is biological even when the mechanism is supernatural. And her blood feels less like generic witch blood and more like a toxic payload. Something carrying not just her magic, but her terrible alchemical will. Glattis is not trying to end life, but rather trying to reroute it. And that's a logic older than the mountains, because it's parasite logic, infestation logic, and it's also addiction logic if we're gonna loop back to the beginning, which is why the movie fuses these themes of addiction and transmission so cleanly. Something enters you and alters your chemistry, and eventually you stop serving yourself and start serving your fix, or in the case of the weaponized, the hive. Glattis is what happens when that process becomes centralized to a person. Weapons is a veritable spreadsheet of numerical code, and the film keeps dropping clues that make more sense once you understand transmission is the central idea. Kreger wants the disappearance to feel less like a random crime and more like a rupture, a darkly loaded moment where the ordinary gives way to the inexplicable. In Genesis, the Great Flood begins on the 17th day of the second month. 2:17, the moment the heavens cracked open and drowned the world below. Judgment and salvation in the same number. And watch how the weaponized children move. They're all clothed in various shades of blue. They're all operating as a single unthinking mass, crashing through houses and windows like water through a breach. They move like a flood. And like flood victims, they're drowned, but not in water, but rather in Glattis's will, their individual selves completely submerged and washed away. And then there's the number 1948, which the film repeats with enough insistence that it stops feeling like set dressing and starts feeling like a symbolic marker. 1948 is a boundary year, scarred by social upheaval and mass population transfers. Old borders dissolved and new lines drawn. A partition year, a threshold year, a blood covenant year. And it could also be an Easter egg pointing to Glattis's birthday, which would make her 77 years old in the film's present of 2025. But wait, there's more. In Jewish chronology, 1948 Anno Mundi is the year Abraham was born, the beginning of the covenant between God and man, sealed in blood. That thematic imagery runs throughout the whole film. Blood activates her spells. Blood destroys her. Alex Lilly's own blood is the weapon that kills Glattis. Which brings us to Lilith. In Jewish and Gnostic tradition, Lilith was Adam's first wife, later demonized as a night witch who preys on children, who takes instead of gives, who corrupts instead of nurtures. Does that sound familiar? The family Glattis consumes is named the Lilies. That breadcrumb is the size of a loaf. And let's not forget the scissors. Glattis is always cutting locks of hair from her victims, evoking Atropos, the Greek fate who severs the thread of life. And back to the question of 77. Depending on how much the Glattis prequel dives into her origins, this number may become very significant. Biblically, it points towards escalation, multiplication, cycles that don't stop but rather compound. Lamech, who is a descendant of Cain, declares 77-fold vengeance in Genesis, which biblical scholars say is a unbreakable cycle of retribution, which is exactly what Glattis is, an ongoing accretion of evil, a wound that never clots, a dark force that's transmitted through time, responsible for untold cycles of suffering and atrocity. Glattis is a threshold creature, a boundary creature, a thing that partitions reality into before and after, safe and consumed, self and weapon. She is a living binary. And then there's the color code of blue and red. Blue is normalcy, society, the mass of people moving through the world without knowing what moves beneath it. Almost every child Glattis takes is wearing blue. Blue backpacks, blue clothing, blue accessories. Their parents drive blue cars and live in blue houses. The film's whole color palette is tinged blue. And when you're blue in this film, you're part of the system, and you're at risk, because something ancient and insectile and coded red is acting on you regardless of law or social contract. And red is rupture. The moment the system breaks wide open and what's hidden inside spills out. When these colors combine, when red and blue combine, something terrible happens every time. The epicenter of Glattis's infestation is the Lily House, which is red brick with blue shutters. Marcus ends up weaponized in blue clothing soaked in red at a gas station that is red and blue. Paul pricks himself on James's needle while wearing blue gloves and causes red blood to well up. Blue meets red and two men's fates are locked together in an instant. Fear and anger transmitted through a puncture wound. This is the film being extremely literal about what transmission looks like, a foreign substance entering the bloodstream. Paul's panic in that moment, the horror of a man who knows something just got into him that he probably can't take back, is the film's anxiety about infection and transmission summarized in a few potent frames. That anxiety runs everywhere. Alex's parents, after repeatedly being bent to Gladys's will, are left pockmarked and disfigured, their faces ravaged like victims of virulent disease, or skin that's been stung repeatedly by something venomous. It reads like plague imagery because it is plague imagery. Glattis is pestilence. And I think the clearest example of this code in action is the Donna and Justine scene. Donna, who's coded in red, attacks Justine in the liquor store after discovering Paul's affair, knocking her down and dousing her in vodka, an accelerant. A metaphorical burning at the stake followed by the witch trial the town had already put Justine through. Red acting on blue. In the film's color code, it's the transmission thesis made literal. Red transfers itself onto blue, contaminates it, and ignites it. And look no further than the children to see this in play. The children start the cycle in blue and they end drenched in red. And the cycle continues. The ending is not closure, it's transfer. Gladys dies, torn to wet chunks by the same children she weaponized. It's violent and funny, ironic and cathartic, a release of the enormous tension that had built up throughout the entire movie. But that feeling is almost immediately poisoned by the cold reality of transmission. Because these kids can't go back to what they were before the infection, before they were wholly inhabited and switched off from the inside, from the very seat of their souls. Because killing Gladys doesn't stop what's already been transferred, it only forces the next question. Where does the cycle pick back up? And that's where Alex Lilly matters. He was left behind from the very beginning, and the movie trains us to read that as an exception. But by the end, it looks more like selection. Alex uses his own blood to activate the weaponized children and kill Gladys. The cycle resolves with him. And then he leaves off screen with a mysterious aunt carrying exactly the same kind of symbolic residue that horror movies like Weapons deliberately torture audiences with. And here's my white hot take. I don't think a witch died, but I do think a carrier changed. The mode of transmission shifted. Alex Lilly doesn't merely survive, he inherits Gladys's power. The random mystery aunt at the end doesn't feel like a rescue, it feels like someone who has arrived to collect what the cycle inevitably produces. Witches live in covens. And it's plausible that this aunt has the same ghoulish gifts as her sister Gladys, and that she will foster those gifts in Alex, who has already used them to take a life. Alex has been marked for this role from birth. His last name is Lilly, close enough to Lilith to feel deliberate in a film this loaded with blood magic and inherited corruption. He uses his own blood to kill Gladys, and blood magic that potent doesn't feel accidental, it feels inherited, ancestral. Alex doesn't destroy Gladys, he usurps her. He continues the cycle. And that's what makes this particular ending so ugly. Not that evil survives, because horror movies do that shit all the time. Nah, this is the darkest ending because Gladys was not the point of the film. She was just a point on a long continuum of blood and death, and the dark force that animated her has been transmitted into a fresh young body, free again to walk the earth and to start the cycle anew. So what is Weapons really about? It's about transmission. The way grief and rage, violence and pestilence enter a family, a town, a body, and refuse to stay contained. About the way addiction hollows a person out and then reaches for whoever's closest to them. And the way fear spreads faster than any plague. The way horror almost never arrives looking like horror. It arrives looking familiar, harmless. And that's what makes Gladys so effective as a monster. She's not simply evil, she's a delivery system for evil. A body that has rotted away until only the mechanism of relentless, cancerous contagion remains. And once you see the film that way, everything clicks into place. The school shooting imagery, the addiction motif, the color code, the children as drones, the town as infected organism, and the witch as parasite. The ending as transfer rather than resolution. Weapons is not about Gladys. Not really. It's about the primal, unknowable forces unleashed through Glattis, and the darkness that survives her. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. Next time we go even deeper, and that's a threat. I'm Goblinsburg, and there's always something beneath the story. So let me know in the comments what you think Glattis really is, and whether Alex escaped anything at all. See you in the next one.